Hello my little demons, Jules here for WhatCulture.com, here in the isolation station here in Wales to present to you another episode of the awesomely titled and awfully hosted Choose Your Own Adventure, the weekly format with a medieval theme where you guys submit the content to me, I send it out to the hive mind that is WhatCulture and then bring it back through my big head and then expunge it through my fanny-ish mouth. For you lovely people. Yes, you eating the salsa dip that has clearly gone off more than a few weeks ago. But you know what? In this current situation, no one's going to judge you. I'm not going to judge you. Let's see what today's list's on about. Today's list is actually on 10 MIA gaming franchises that need a reboot. And that's the thing. There have been so many great games in our generation and before that came and went just like that. We have Straka Zulu to thank for this week's idea. Remember that you can chat to me here in the live video chat or put your comments down below for what you'd like to see next week, and I will present them for you lovely, lovely people. If we can get over 7,000 likes, is that asking too much? I will do next week's episode with something drawn on my head. Sound like a good one? Anyway, let's crack on with today's list. I'm going to regret that. Number 10, Duke Nukem. If there's one thing that can be said for Duke Nukem is that he has tried very hard for 14 years to try and stay relevant. And if you're one of the odd few people who thought that Duke Nukem Forever was a good game, I mean, you're wrong. It was a buggy mess for water cooler masturbators and had very little to offer apart from, I don't know, possibly being the first game in the world to actually devolve players who spent more than a few minutes with it. Do I think that he deserves a comeback? Yes, I do. And you know why? Because of the fact that when he's actually doing what he's good at, aka shooting aliens, it's actually a really good franchise. It's just him as a character is absolutely putrid. He doesn't exist in today's gaming thing. It was proven time over and time again. But if we actually had like a redemption story for him. Imagine this. It's a washed up Duke. He's just absolutely been torn to shreds by the media and the public for just being basically the asshole that everyone knew he was. But then all of a sudden, the aliens come back down again. The pig cops are back in force and it's up to him to put down the booby mags and pick up the big guns and show the world why he was a hero in the first place. And maybe he dies at the end, to give him that nice little redemption arc. Just one more shot, because seeing the way that he was treated and flip-flopped and passed off with blasé attitude by Gearbox, not even he deserved that. Number 9, House of the Dead. Right, so join me in my time machine for a second, because we're going to go back to the 1990s. Ooh. Oh, it's exactly the same. Just imagine I've got hair. There we go, that's set the record straight that we are now in the 90s. And imagine you're watching a young me pick up a Dreamcast controller and my friend saying, here, have a quick whapsy on House of the Dead 2. My eyes were opened. It was utterly brilliant. I know that there were other like light gun games out there, but this just spoke to me. I was going through my first experiences with like proper horror movies at the time, so I was like, the terrible dialogue, the B-movie campiness of this entire thing, it just resonates with me, your boy. Haired Jules. Fringe, I had a fringe. I had an emo fringe back in the day. We all did. Chef's kiss game though, that's what I'm trying to say. However, it wasn't really the sales juggernaut that Sega needed it to be, and that fucking awful film didn't help with its standings in the slightest. But then we got a glimmer of hope with House of the Dead Overkill. My god, that game was good. So good in fact that Sega did all with it. What are you doing? I mean, I know that they did a Typing of the Dead spin-off thing for it, but that franchise was finally on fire, and you put it on ice. This franchise is groaning for a comeback, and with the rise of VR, this could well be an on-the-rails shooter that manages to tick both the boxes of nostalgia and embrace current tech in the right way. Please, Sega. Please. For little fringy Jules. He's in heaven now. He's dead. Number 8, Dino Crisis. My god, I love this franchise, and with each remake that Capcom is squeaking out of his pipes, I know deep down that we are eking ever closer to a Dino Crisis remake. I can feel it in my bones. I mean, I hope that it doesn't follow the route of Dino Crisis 3, but still dinosaurs on an island with a Resident Evil vibe? Yes, son. Well, in fact, Dino Crisis 3 was actually the reason this franchise went completely extinct, because instead of resolving the cliffhanger plot of Dino Crisis 2, instead we were sent into space with new characters, a new plot, and a completely awful camera which was as much an enemy as the overgrown lizards were. And yet we've seen Capcom rescue franchises from the brink before, with the likes of Resident Evil 7 picking up the bootstraps of whatever Resident Evil 6 was. So do I think that Capcom could not only release this and do well with it? Hells yeah, my dude. Number 7, Steel Battalion. Okay, so granted, Steel Battalion as a game was a pretty gimmicky one, and to be honest, you probably only really bought it because of the massive controller more than the actual game itself. But you know what? It has gained such a cult-like following that it's very hard to ignore nowadays. However, what happened to that fan base next was just plain cruel. It was announced that the franchise would be getting a new game in 2012, which sent them into a meltdown. I mean, after all, they've been waiting since 2004 for another installment, and all began to dust off their huge controllers to once again jump back into the driving seat. And then they announced that it was going to be a VR Kinect game with zero use of the controller. Take one of them. That's what it was. That was Microsoft to a Steel Battalion fan. Take one of them. And to top it all off, the controls didn't even bloody work, leading Heavy Armor to top many worst games of the year lists in 2012. And yet, that's exactly the reason why this game needs to make a comeback. Either with VR or with another weighty controller, could you imagine what it would be like to step in with the current gen tech and experience that mech shooting, take that, die, die society, die. And if you did it in VR, you could have you and a mate or a couple of other mates inside the cockpit and actually have them doing different jobs. And best of all, if you were the captain, imagine this, you've got your little like chair here, like in Starfleet Command or whatever that one was, but it's got buttons, and if they mess up, boop, ejector seat, poof, straight up the top. Tell me that isn't a license to print money. Number 6, BANJO-KAZOOIE. Oh, poor old BANJO-KAZOOIE. I mean, it just hasn't been given a chance to try and impress a new generation, has it? This was a series hailed as having some of the greatest platforming games ever made, with some even arguing that it places above Super Mario. The non-linear open worlds were way ahead of its time, and the steady progression of learning new abilities to gather various items was inspired. So what the hell happened with BANJO-KAZOOIE nuts and bolts? Why did this game take everything that the player base had proven that they loved and just did away with it? It even openly mocked it as well, instead preferring to go with vehicles and empty open worlds devoid of anything to do. And a lot of fans in response to that just said, well, you've lost your soul. But you know what Microsoft did? Microsoft looked at the bottoming out sales of this franchise with that release and just said, oh, I guess that people aren't really into BANJO-KAZOOIE anymore. Oh, well, time to put you into the attic, Rare, with the rest of the other collection. Honestly, they deserve better than that. And that is something that I'll be saying a lot in this list, I am aware. But trust me, like, people went absolutely bananas when they were announced for Smash. You don't think that they would instantly flock to a new game for the Bird and Bear? Of course they would. The only thing that I would say is that for this to actually happen and to be a success, they kind of need to get out from underneath Microsoft. And I don't know if that's possible. Number 5, Silent Hill. So the rumour of Silent Hills getting a remaster, another installment, or an entire remake has been on Josh Brown's sexy lips for absolutely months, ever since the unfortunate cancellation of PT or whatever the game that was going to lead to was going to be. I mean, in that demo, we got to see something truly impressive. We got to see minimalist horror of what could be done with such a small and confining space. And if it had been executed into a full game, and those premises and these lessons taught moved into a full retail game experience, it could have been a horror masterpiece. But unfortunately, we'll never know. And yet the series has been on ice since, with Konami instead being more interested in pachinko machines than pioneering pant-wetting moments. And you know what? From a business perspective, I can actually kind of understand it, as horrible as it is to say, because the investment costs of a new game far exceed that of making a bloody pachinko machine, and those pachinko machines are actually doing really well in arcades. I know people want to slate them, but they are pulling an absolute bank. But you know what? They need to take that risk again, because it is the hard counter to Resident Evil's body horror, because this was monsters that have meaning. These are monsters that have interpretation and mythological backgrounds and horror stories involved in their character designs. That's what made that series so interesting. We don't really have anything like that nowadays. And to put it bluntly, Konami kind of need a win as well, so why not deliver one of the most successful franchises that they've ever had the joy of holding? Again, money on the table. You're just apparently pushing off and feeding to the dog. Dog doesn't eat money, but it's trying to feed it to him anyway. Number 4, PSI-OPS the MINDGATE Conspiracy. It is boggling that this game never got a sequel. I mean, it got rave reviews when it came out and has garnered a cult-like following, and yet we've seen naff all from it. PSI-OPS's brilliant gameplay blended tight shooting mechanics and blissful, cherry-on-the-top mind power action as well. Being able to lift enemies into the air with telekinesis or burn them to a crisp was an utter joy, and the ways in which you could approach combat were so incredibly varied that you'd actively want to go through the game again to try out new tactics. So why didn't this game get a sequel? Well, a lot of people have posited it because it was the fact that it was released quite late into that generation of consoles' life cycle. So even despite having rave reviews, didn't actually sell that well as people were gearing up for the next one. And also the fact that it was released in a pretty heavy window, and by that I mean it was GTA San Andreas, Halo 2, and Metal Gear Solid 3. Yeah, it got absolutely buried. So let's re-unearth this gem, give it a polish up, put it on the mantelpiece. Let's do it. Number 3, Jade Empire. Since BioWare's Golden Series Mass Effect is going to be left hanging for a little while at least, why not revive an old classic such as Jade Empire? If you've not played this game, it's kind of like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon meets the classic old school narrative weight that BioWare used to have. Yeah, it was pretty damn good. Honestly, going through this game was a pure joy, and that fighting system, while being a little rough around the edges by today's standards, is still a much more tactile and responsive engine than BioWare had ever tried before that point. So imagine if this area and the graphics were given a little polish up and or a sequel, even a remaster, and quite frankly BioWare would have a surefire hit on their hands. And they need this more than they'd care to admit. With Anthem going down to a chorus of boos and Andromeda absolutely nosediving, BioWare need to show fans what they are about, because they've lost a lot of respect from the fan base. And this is the thing, if they could provide something like Jade Empire, free of microtransactions, free of publisher meddling, and just allowing them to do what they do best, which is tell great stories, then honestly, it would not only improve their reputation, but it would bring so many more people to this brilliant IP that could itself spawn a future franchise. Number 2, Advent Rising. So Advent Rising was a very ambitious game when it was released back in 2005. It was meant to be the start of this epic space opera trilogy chronicling the war against an alien race called the Seekers, who intended to eradicate the human race for unknown but probably nefarious reasons. I mean, so far, so sci-fi guff, right? Well, guess what? This story actually delivered in spades, being one of the best things about this entire game. So much so that the cult following that is garnered around this, they love this and can overlook other things like the massive amount of bugs and the fact that the graphics look absolutely cack. But it was those last two things that meant that it didn't sell well, which is always understandable, but it's quite annoying when you've got a great narrative that's just waiting to be retold again. Even though the story did eventually continue in comic book format, fans felt like this was a bittersweet resolution, and the game's lead designer Donald Mustard has gone on record stating that he would be happy to finish the Advent series if the opportunity presented itself. You know what, friends? Maybe now is the time to give him that opportunity. And number 1, Jet Set Radio. Jet Set Radio! Understand the concept of love I have for this game. Yes, that joke was worth it. This game is without a doubt one of my favourite franchises, and say it with me, kids. It's stylish, it's confident, and its characters defined my childhood, and none more so than the brilliant Jet Set Radio Future. When I got my original Xbox and this was bundled with it, I didn't know what to make of it. It was just one of those things like, oh, I got a free game, pass it off, let's play something else. But when I actually gave it the time, I was like, oh my god, this game's real good. It's just got that funky soundtrack. Yeah. Macho Man, Randy Savage, dead. And yet with a copy of this game being in nearly every household who bought an original Xbox bundle, at least here in the UK, why the hell hasn't this game even had a sniff of a follow-up? Aside from a cameo in All-Stars Sonic Racing Transformed, there's been nothing on the Jet Set Radio Future front, and it is crying out for a sequel, or at least a remaster, because it had cel-shaded graphics. And everyone knows, as the Wind Waker proved, you can just basically take those and no one will even notice the upgrade because all you need to do is just define the lines a bit more. I mean, hell, Sunset Overdrive took clear inspiration from this series and people went absolutely crazy for it. So there is still a market for this unique concept of graffiti / inline skating / platformer that's not really been done anywhere else. So please, Sega, give us a Jet Set Radio Future sequel or a remaster of that game, please. And if you won't do it for me, then do it for Potts the dog, the 3D glasses wearing dog that you can unlock in that game, because he wasn't just a good boy, he was my boy. And there we go, my friends. That was Choose Your Own Adventure for this week. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below, and give me a little shout out in the little live chat. Hey, you've done a great job, mate. Hey, tip top. Also, Osley, who's edited this, what an absolute ledge you are as well. And don't forget that you can submit your ideas for next week's episode down below. I'll pick one, do my little magic spell, and turn it into absolute tosh next week for you lovely little demons. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. We spoke today about franchises that desperately needed a reboot. And sometimes the concept of a reboot can be applied to our own lives as well, because we spend so much time in society trying to plow ahead to try and achieve happiness through success or doing stuff to try and basically drown out other things that are going on in our lives to prove that we are worth something by doing something. And you know what? Sometimes it is okay to just hit that reset button, that reboot as it were, and give yourself a break. Please be kind to yourself. Don't burn out on all of this stuff that's going on at the moment. It's incredibly tense what's going on. Changes every single day. Frustration of being inside. But don't be an arsehole to yourself, because you don't deserve that. You deserve love, happiness, and success. We all do. So take any negative mindset and, if you can, hit the reset button. Give yourself a bit of distance and a bit of a break, and if you need help, remember, you can still speak to people. Right now, it might feel like you're isolated, but trust me, all of those social connections are still open and available to you. If it's hard to start a conversation, and I understand that as well, but please, for me, if you're struggling, try. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. You can go follow me at RetroJ over on Twitter, and I'd love to see you over at Live and Let's Dice, my board game channel as well, if you have the time. But until then, I'll see you next Tuesday. Oh dear, that was a swear. Naughty little boy. Spank my bottom.